The playlist mentioned here is Sean William Higgins playlist econ, E-C-O-N, /political. Sean William Higgins playlist econ /political.
Okay, today is August 2nd, 2020. This video is backyard conversations with Sean William Higgins. These thoughts and ideas were developed from sources all over the world of all kinds regarding coming events, and there is no way to organize this. This is going to be an ad hoc comments after all the work has been done in the last 3 years, and the playlist, Sean William Higgins playlist, Econ Political, has been virtually wrapped up in what is happening, and the information about the videos has gone out to all the churches in the United States, some 90,300, all the governments of the top 15 U.S. trading partners, alerting them to the problems that are going to be caused by what Interbank and the Federal Reserve is doing by devaluating extremely the U.S. dollar, and why this is showing stepping stones right to the Chinese treasury and the wealth of the government and the wealth of the people, two different things in the trillions of dollars each. Why are there stepping stones laid out by design to directly from where Interbank stands today? And given that Interbank express mission statement is to put in, now with those two qualities, plus the fact they insist that they twist the arm of the government to make the citizens of the country liable for any debts that the government defaults upon. Now, that is it. Sum total, the Federal Reserve is not a reserve. It was given that name explicitly by them in their statements, verbal statements, that they chose that name to make it look like a central bank as though it had some reserve. It is a for-profit corporation in the United States, and they make their money, as any corporation has, as its raison d'etre is to make money off the manipulation of the U.S. dollar. And those are the two things they have to go on, is that they have the exclusive right, legal right given, it's not moral, but it's legal by the U.S. Congress to print electronic credits out of thin air and dilute. Basically, it is diluting the U.S. dollar for them. And that's how they make their money. And the interest rates, they manipulate those from 0 to up to 20% in order to create business cycles, boom and bust, that they profit off of because they know what's coming. And they have so indicated this in the past, that they explicitly do this for these reasons and under these conditions in order to make money. Okay, they have said this. Why people don't know, well, that's another matter. You probably don't believe this. That's interesting in itself. Yet you have no knowledge of this. Now, why do you believe something you have no knowledge of when it's so detrimental to you? Why don't you see that it's detrimental? The secret tax or silent tax, the concept of value that's in the hyperinflation part 1 should be taught in universities and known common knowledge that if you have a dollar bill, for instance, that was printed electronically, or whatever what it means. Let's say it's physical. This will be a good example. Say you have a physical dollar bill, and you look at the serial number, and its publication date was in 1972. At that time, it had a value, say, of 100%. Okay, whatever the value was, it's 100% at a time. Now, in 1915, if you had a dollar and you had a dollar today, it's only worth like a nickel. Okay, so the value, the purchasing power of a dollar physically printed in 1972 would not be a dollar in 1915 terms. Now, this is what gets complicated for some people. And it's why the interbank people can make money, because people don't look into this carefully. But we're going to concentrate on the value of a dollar bill printed in 1972 is arbitrarily, we're going to say, 100%. Okay? And that 100% represents the purchasing power at that time. And the purchasing power at that time of a dollar bill, we're saying the value of it is at 100% of that dollar bill's value. Okay? Is that clear? You get a 1972 dollar bill and you get a 1999 dollar bill. They both have 100% value at the time of their printing, but they have different purchasing power. Okay? The purchasing power and value are two independent things. Now, this is new to you, but I'm doing this because it's necessary to convey the concept that's coming, that you delineate very clearly that the purchasing power is declining constantly of the U.S. dollar over time. However, the value of a dollar bill in 1972 is not declining ever. The value of a 1972 dollar bill is 100% at birth. It is 100% in 1999. The purchasing power changes in it, though. The purchasing power is independent of the concept that I'm introducing right now called value. This does not relate to any definition you've ever used before, value. This is like an algebraic expression, f of x. I'm giving the quantity in x something called value, and I'm defining it now as a function. And just review the tape in the last minute. This is a very different concept. Now, why is this important? Okay, here goes. So you get a 1972 dollar bill. The value is 100%. Now, inflation, people say, oh, there's inflation. No, it's not inflation. It's not hyperinflation. It's dilution of the U.S. currency. That causes people to raise prices because the dollar has been diluted in value. This is a different focus, and it's an important focus to understand what's happening in this country. Why is the focus on raising prices? Well, it's creating money for somebody. Interesting. Now you can say, why is it? No, it is creating money for somebody. Every time you believe that, you go ching, and it's putting money in somebody's pocket. Whose? Exactly. Whose pocket is it putting money into? Well, okay. It's interesting that Connally, with Nixon, talked Nixon into creating the fiat currency. And they came out and said, oh, it's to stabilize the currency, and it was typical interbank crap. That was in 71. 72, stagflation hit. Immediately, the work of interbank people to extract wealth out of the country, you gave them this right. And you see what happened when you don't pay attention and you don't understand value. You don't understand these people are motivated by greed and nothing more. It is well known, the study, that every fiat currency that has been adopted by any country in all recorded history has always ended in hyperinflation. Why do you not see this? Well, interesting enough, there's one exception. Yeah, one exception. Does that negate the rule? No, because it's Switzerland. Why is this significant? Well, why are the borders of Switzerland so drawn across the tops of the Alps? You know, at the time that Switzerland was created and the families who had great wealth, were absconding and pillaging civilizations and countries and there was no computers. It was in physical objects, and they had to have a physical place that was highly defendable. And look, where in the world, Western world, are you going to draw the borders? Well, look at Switzerland. Isn't that interesting? And it isn't interesting that their currency has never experienced any of the ravages that all the other countries are. Virtually every country has been ravaged by. And if you realize that it's not high, that it's extreme devaluation, well, why? Who is extremely devaluing, diluting the currency of all these other countries, and not Switzerland? Why is it that the Interbank people go out into the other countries and establish their, quote, banks, like Conley got, like the U.S. Congress did for the Federal Reserve, the Federal Corporation Reserve? Swiss have been stable since the mid-1700s. How come? Given the terrible wars and pestilence and everything that has beset the world, why not Switzerland? You see, the power of the banks resides in the people who own the banks, who are the founders. They are in control. And these people make their money off loaning money to governments, to armies. They finance both sides of the government, both sides of the war, and they have stated verbally, explicitly, according to their recordings of their voices, we don't, quote, we don't care what your politics are. We don't care what your government is. We don't care your religion. We don't care your economics. The only thing we want, and in fact insist on, is that we have the exclusive, are given the legal exclusive right by your government to print your currency in whatever manner that is, and to control the interest rates. What that means is if your government needs to borrow money, you have to come to us, and we will print up the money for you out of some trees or electronically, and then we're going to charge you interest on the money that we just, quote, loaned you, that we didn't have, but we just created out of nothing. And that's how we make our money, by loaning you fictitious currency. And they do this time and time and time again. And that's what the Federal Reserve has been doing. And they say they're, with the coronavirus, they're now injecting cash. The central bank is injecting, they're not a bank. And Trump is going to talk to the feds, like you think they're part of the U.S. government, that he has any control over them. No, they're a private corporation. He couldn't go to Boeing and get them to change their prices, could he? Well, he can't go to the Federal Reserve Corporation and get them to do anything. So they are printing up, diluting, let's just call it like it is, what the function of it. They're diluting the U.S. dollar, $3 trillion in the stimulus package. And they're going to looking at, again, another $3 trillion. Isn't it interesting that the virus is being used, I'm sorry, but it is being used to justify shutting down the U.S. economy. And then the public opinion wants these $3 trillion and another $3 trillion and monthly trillions more, and more to unemployment benefits. And I'm not saying these people don't need it. I'm just saying, look at what's happening with the dilution by the Federal Reserve, by the Federal Reserve Corporation. And then they've gone into the bond market to, quote, prop it up and add to their, quote, portfolio. Many trillions more dilution. Other governments around the world are very concerned about this, China in particular. Other countries are coming out and saying, I think Macron, French guy, okay, no disrespect, I just can't speak French. Could at one point. Anyway, so yeah, what are you guys doing over there, Don't you realize you're going to have to pay for this? And, how long are other countries going to hold on to their U.S. treasuries with the dilution going on by the Federal Reserve Corporation? And it's interesting to note that the paranoia, and it is paranoia, is not necessary to control a virus, and it is bad. And I would just like to point out that of the 16.7 trillion million cases of the virus, there are only 660,000 deaths. That's like a 3% death rate. Yet a regular flu season, according to the CDC of the United States, is 6.5% death rate, and there's no panic or paranoia about that. Yet it is almost 35 to 40% higher death rate in the common ordinary flu. Why is the cases being reported and not the death rate? You see, people are being scared by high visibility closures. And if you look at what's happening in the media, you see that paranoia is purposely being created. High visibility stuff that doesn't make any sense at all, and it's simply for the express purpose of creating paranoia. And paranoia is not necessary nor useful in controlling the virus. You look at what's happening, paranoia has gone over the top. People will say this, they're going to hear this, and they're going to say it's not true. That's part of their paranoia and their belief, and that's why they can't access any more information and get a handle on the real problem here is that the U.S. economy and other economies around the world, it's crazy to see the high visibility paranoia thing with Bernie Sanders. I mean, good guy, but, in his own right, what he's trying to do, but, he is so off base in his belief in this paranoia. I mean, look at all the people who believe in McCarthyism. Look at the damage it did to people in this country. The outright damage. The red peril, the communism, the yellow peril, the drug craze, has done nothing for the drug war except raise prices and profits for the organized crime. The general public is the last people to come to dinner. Well, the press is the last people to come to dinner. Now, why is it that the Swiss franc has never encountered this? Because the people who are behind Interbank, who are going around defrauding and putting these fraudulent, quote, central banks up around the world, are based in Switzerland. Their currency, they've got to have some store of their value, right? They have some kind of store of their value, and it's in the Swiss franc, so they're not going to devalue their Swiss franc. So you want to know a place to put your money? Get out of the U.S. dollar. People have been saying that. I've been saying it for 3 years, and finally people are coming out. Billionaire. Well, great. Billionaire. Boy, they're not late coming to the table. Yeah, get out of the U.S. dollar because, stopping the Federal Reserve Corporation, I've been trying to do this, and, the Interbank people are so powerful, You see what they've been doing around the world. I mean, they are probably the most powerful group of people in the entire world. They have defrauded and defrocked and manipulated and gotten into nearly every country, and their now target is China. Why is it that there's a pathstones laid right to China's wealth? If you look at what's happening, that the interest rate is again zero by the Federal Reserve in this country. The stock market is again 30 times what it was in 72. And they're on the route, they're diluting the U.S. dollar hand over fist by the trillions of dollars now, in this year. Why is it that this is going to create all the U.S. treasuries that China has had? Of course, they've dumped now $500 billion twice in the last 16, 18 months. Why is that? It's because they see what's coming. What happens if that happens? And what happens if hyper devaluation, hyper dilution of the U.S. dollar occurs and people's wealth in this country goes to zero, like Venezuela is 10 million% this year, and so you have the dilution of the U.S. dollar. Actually, once the dilution fear takes place in countries around the world and they start dumping their U.S. dollars, you now have hyper devaluation of the U.S. dollar along with hyper-dilution. Now, those are two different things. Once the dilution gets going, it creates a firestorm, which feeds on itself, and you get hyper-devaluation because people start dumping their the governments and people start dumping their U.S. treasuries and those kinds of things on the market. So you have two different things, hyper-dilution and hyper-devaluation, okay? And of course, that leads to hyperinflation eventually within the country, and people focus on the hyperinflation, and actually the hyper-dilution occurred by the Interbank people who were resident or in the host country. They're a parasite. The Interbank people are parasites. Their expressed mission statement, as I've stated, is to make money off the manipulation and control of that country's currency, and now that's how they extract the wealth out of a country. And we now arrive back at, well, just a second. So the path stones go to the dilution of the currency and creation of hyper devaluation of the U.S. dollar by the coming from the hyper dilution will mean that the value of people's savings account will go effectively to zero. For instance, in Venezuela, now 10%, the inflation rate, okay, that puts everybody's money at zero. And when you get this hyper devaluation of the U.S. dollar going, people's purchasing power of their dollars will go to zero, even though the quantities in their accounts will stay the same. That means they can't import anything. And this is typical of every country virtually that experiences this hyper devaluation of their currency. There's nothing wrong with the United States. The problem is with the currency, and actually the Federal Reserve and Interbank, who are manipulating the situation because it creates huge profits for them, and they have incomes on the order of small countries every year, and they have to do incredible things to make that type of income, year-to-year growth, profit, like any corporation. That's what they want. That's their greed, insatiable. They are the height of greed in this world, and they are parasites. So when you get the hyper devaluation going in the U.S. dollar, nobody can import anything because nobody's got any money, either for internal business or external. So what does that do? We are China's biggest importer. We are the biggest importer around the world. China, when they're experience their U.S. treasuries, the huge percentage that they have of U.S. treasuries that create income for their government and goes effectively to zero. The imports, where they're biggest, it goes to zero. What is going to happen to their economy and their people? And other countries around the world can't export to the United States because we don't have the money. And China, you see, it's a house of cards caused solely by the dilution of the U.S. dollar now being carried out by the Federal Reserve. Explicitly, they have said, don't worry, America, we will stand by you with this virus and we will have a bottomless account, right? How could it possibly be if they've got nothing is bottomless except fake dilution, okay? And why is it? There's a pathstone laid directly to China's wealth, because when this happens, when China can't import to the United States, export to the United States and other countries around the world, China is the biggest and the United States are the two biggest economies. What is going to happen to the world economies? Now, China at that point, President Xi knows what's happening, obviously must know what Interbank folks are about, and I'm sure their negotiations, if you might call them that, behind the scenes to get Interbank to get them exclusive right by the Chinese Public Party or whatever, CBC, And you know they're going to resist. But this is effectively a way to get it, force it in there, because when China has to have currency, something of value to support the starvation and the recession, depression that's going to be caused by the stoppage of the world economies, because when you stop the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy from importing and exporting, it's going to bring a screeching halt the entire world economy, and President Xi's people are going to need money to survive, pure and simple. And Interbank, guess who's standing there? Interbank. Guess who's got the currency? The Swiss franc. It's preserved the currency and the value of Interbank folks, their family and their employees for many centuries now, many centuries, through all the thick and thin of all the things that have ever happened in the world. Why is Switzerland unaffected, unfazed? Why? Well, why? Why do you think? It's obvious, isn't it? Why? You can. Why these stepping stones to the Chinese wealth? Well, let's don't speculate on motivation. Just look at the fact that out of all the places that you could put stepping stones, you've got the U.S. dollar, you've got the Federal Reserve Corporation, the next one is the dilution of the U.S. dollar, you've got the depletion of the U.S. citizens' wealth, you've got the extreme devaluation of China's U.S. dollar holdings, you've got the cessation of imports from China, you've got the starvation and suffering of the Chinese people, you've got the Interbank people who've always stepped in this kind of situation, humanitarian obviously, standing there, a stepping stone for them to stand on right at President Xi's headquarters. Now, the stepping stones are there. Now, you can speculate all you want on the motivation. I'm just saying that what I have just laid out, those stepping stones are actually already done. They were man-made. They do not lead to India's door. They do not lead to 10 Downing Street. They do not lead to Abu Dhabi. They do not lead to Mumbai. They do not lead to Dublin. They do not lead to Reykjavik. They do not lead to Moscow. Okay? Look, there are 200 some countries. I ain't going there. They lead directly, man-made, to right to President Xi and the Central Party of China. Okay? They're there. You can speculate on why. I would just like to point out at this point, when Volcker appeared, the real estate crisis. Right. Look at what happened there. Interest rates by the Federal Reserve, the crash. Same way, stock market, 1929. Interest rate zero. Who created the crash? Right. Who created the crash? Who? Well, it was done because they increased the margin requirements from 10 to 50%. Well, of course it crashed. Well, who did that? Okay, I'm just saying. So Volcker said, look, we got to create the bazooka. We're not going to need it. We know it looks dangerous and, but we're not going to need it, Of course, Volcker, Federal Reserve Corporation, right? Before Senate. We're not going to need it, but you give it to us to help us out in this period of this real estate crisis because we're going to need it in order to, get the banks around America to put confidence back in the market, where, here's Mr. Volcker, the good guy from the Fed saying, when Congress give us a bazooka and so we can go around, we're not going to need it, but, we do need it in order to create confidence and restore public, What, a month or two later, he's back there. He says, yeah, well, isn't it fortunate we had the bazooka because, turns out we really needed it. Yeah, well, you know how much money the Federal Reserve Corporation made out of use of that bazooka? I'm just saying that the bazooka was a stepping stone. I'm just saying that the stepping stones are going directly to President Xi's and the Central Party's China. They are man-made. Why? They're going to no place else in the world. And you know what happens? If this happens, the conflagration, the catastrophe that's going to happen in the world, if the U.S. dollar is diluted to the extent of hyper devaluation occurs, think about it. Think about it. Think about the countries whose income depends on imports of the United States citizens and China. Think about the conflagration. Think about the economic and the catastrophe and the implications and the physical suffering that's going to happen. Already 25,000 people dying every day, according to the UN, from starvation alone. Now think of what's going to happen. Think of all the aid that's coming from all the governments to developing all the starving people, all the diseases that money has to be, when that dries up. Think about all the implications if the Federal Reserve is allowed to dilute the U.S. dollar, as they say they're going to do, as they are doing, by the trillions. By the trillions, even as I speak. They say their words, we have a bottomless pit, a bottomless account. The stepping stones, why are they there? Now, the value, to wrap this up, the last part here, remember the value, 100% of a $72 bill. Now, the public around the world goes, my dollars don't buy as much as they used to, Purchasing power is down to, say, 20%. It's too bad. It's inflation, Well, that dollar of 1972 print spent in 1990 still has the same 100% value that it had in 1972. The purchasing power is only 20%, and people go, well, suppose you were a 3-year-old and you had a glass of water and you came back in a month and there was only 20% there. It's reasonable to say that a 3-year-old would say, hey, look at that, magic. Well, you're adults. What the heck is the matter with you? You know as well as I do that the 80% of that water went somewhere, and that's the same is true with value. That the value of that 72 printed dollar bill is the same in 1990. The purchasing power is only 20%. The 80% of the purchasing power has gone somewhere into the ether, and somebody has a condenser and is condensing it out someplace else. Right. It is well known now when I say it, and you'll know it. You just didn't think about how it was being used. It's called the secret tax. It's called the silent tax, depending on your motivation. Now, it's a siphon, as I said. It's a siphon to take the purchasing power out of any particular day's printing of a bill of the currency. And you hold a dollar bill, and it looks like the same dollar bill, but the purchasing power is depleted. And the dollar bill in 1972, the exchange rate, Forex exchange rate with a Swiss franc was like 4.3 or something at the height there, a little over 4, call it 4, it was a little over 4 to 1 to the US dollar. Well, recently it's around 0.9 or, well, call it 1, okay? One Swiss franc, one swanky, Interbank swanky bill to the US dollar is about 1 to 1. So it's lost 75%. Well, actually 80. I'm going to call it 80 because that's really closer to the fact. It's lost 80% of its value relative to the Swiss franc. If you're looking at purchasing power between the dollar bill of 72 and the dollar bill of today, 2020, it's right around only 20%. So the 20% purchasing power has gone. Now that 20% has gone by way of the silent tax. And everybody around the world who owns any dollar bill in any form has experienced the loss in purchasing power of 80% of their holdings. And that's why billionaires are now saying, get the heck out of the U.S. dollar. And the Swiss franc seems like a pretty safe bet, actually. See what I mean? Actually see why. Stocks, U.S. stocks, not a good. In spite of what Buffett says, I think he's a shill like J.P. Morgan was in 29. Way the silent tax works is that the Federal Reserve prints up the U.S. government asks for a loan, right? Asks for money, and the Interbank people print up the money, give them electronic credits and charge them interest on those electronic credits, right? It's a scam, pure and simple. It's a scam, and so people should wake up to this, and how the Interbank people twisted their arms to get them to allow the Congress to do this. Create this monopoly. So the U.S. wants to borrow money. The Federal Reserve Corporation prints the electronic credits, charges them interest on that, and dilutes the U.S. dollar. That money federal government spends those dollars on government contracts, which go to basically the largest corporations who are owned by, guess who? Well, take J.P. Morgan, who was a shill of Interbank people, now the J.P. Morgan of 29, and he was working with the Interbank people and the Federal Reserve Corporation to defraud the public with the crash and the sub-depression and buying up of all the farms and stuff that they caused the bankruptcy of. You can read about that. If you don't read on the blanched view of American history. But his bank, if you look at what is consolidation of the American banks, it looks like the opposite of a radioactive chain reaction. It goes from many down to, I think there's only 4 left. J.P. Morgan is one of them. Very interesting, don't you think? Well, I think it is interesting. It's just another stepping stone. You can speculate on motivations, but I don't know. And look at the owners of all the major corporations. Consolidating now, 10 major corporations? And you look at Nabisco, Kellogg's, and all these other minor under the umbrella of all these major corporations getting government contracts. And you see that the Federal Reserve, they're printing up dilution of the U.S. dollar, going to the federal government, going to contracts to the major organizations, major corporations who are now consolidated, J.P. Morgan, who are working for Interbank. You see the paper trail. Well, it's there. I'm just saying, it's there. It's actually, that's a record, okay? Well, that is what's happening with, that is the silent tax. It's a rather peculiar and pernicious and insidious mechanism that's being used. This is what's happening with the 100% value of a dollar bill created in 72, 100% value, still has 100% value. The purchasing power has been extracted by the distillation, the evaporation, and then distillation by the silent tax insidious mechanism. And if you look at the money trail, then a money trail is created. It is man-made. It is not a naturally occurring. And that money trail is man-made for the reason to transmit the money from one place to another. Now, if you look at the Federal Reserve Corporation, you see that they make their money by manipulation of the interest rates. And if you see what has happened over time, how they have done this again and again and again and again. And I mean, that's how they make their money. Manipulation of the currency. Manipulation of the interest rates. And they're in the process of doing it right now to bring off a major coup. A major coup. And you can see the stepping stones have been laid out for some time now, going directly to China's plum. I mean, the stepping stones go right out to the apple tree, the plum tree, and right above those, the last stepping stone is a great big plum, and it's virtually the only one within reach of that particular stepping stone. And considering the stepping stones are man-made, I suspect you're going to see somebody on that last stepping stone at some place, at some time, and probably going to be working in conjunction with the people who laid the stepping stones out. Well, this has been Conversations with Sean William Higgins. Sean William Higgins, playlist Econ Political on YouTube. I've tried countless governments and people and friends and relatives, news media, trying to get somebody to wake up and interrupt these stepping stones, get them out of place so they can't be used. Do something about the Federal Reserve. Do something about the centuries-old pernicious parasitism of the Interbank people. You see, it's time something should be done on a world scale. The UN should get together with a resolve to do something to exterminate the Interbank function in this world. Regardless of its roots going into the IMF and the NATO and everybody, because they don't care where they got their roots. They just want to put in suckers someplace to extract wealth somewhere. And so somebody somewhere is going to stand up and get together and do something about these people. August 2nd, 2020, there is still time. There is still time. But it is very late. The stepping stones are in place. The momentum is there. People are behind diluting the U.S. dollar. They're behind it. They want more dilution of the U.S. dollar. Long term, it is not in their interest, but Federal Reserve is going to go gung-ho to do it. Okay, you better make preparations because, stopping the Interbank people, they'll virtually stop at nothing to get money. Virtually nothing. War, pestilence, starvation, murder. I don't care. That's all they want. It's money. That's it. They've done it for centuries. They've caused wars. They've funded both sides of wars. They've funded starvation, pestilence, murder, mayhem, mass genocide. They funded it all just in the sake of money. Just saying. Well, that's it. Signing out. See you around, hopefully, in whatever country we end up.
The playlist mentioned here is Sean William Higgins playlist Econ, ECON, /political. Sean William Higgins playlist Econ, /political.